You seem so eager today to participate. That is so good. I thank you again, Zainab. Okay, so if we check them again, this is the right wing of the page, or the right side of the page. To the right, we have the surface structure. This is the final representation of any English sentence. What about not? Not Jerry could hear me. Or we work according to rules, right, students? We don't work, randomly or haphazardly. At first glance, you might say something like move not to the position after the auxiliary. We know that, right? Whenever we wish to negate a sentence, we should have an auxiliary in order to place not after it. This is the typical rule. This is the traditional rule. Am I right?
Doctor,
Yeah,
how do you know? How do you know this is deep sentence or deep structure of sentence?
You're welcome, Murtaza. Welcome back today. Okay?
Ramadan Kareem, bless Ramadan.
Okay, bless you. Bless you. Bless you, my boy.
Thank you so
Okay?
lot.
And the first sentence, no Jerry could hear me. This would work, but the third sentence would become they are in, not go with us. Remember that the ing or ing, which accompanies the auxiliary be, is part of the auxiliary. It is not a real auxiliary. It is just like, by the way, is it a free or bound morpheme? The ing. It's a morpheme. But what kind of morpheme is this?
Bound,
it's a bomb for sure.
Why
bound
bound?
morpheme.
Bound.
Because it cannot
But
stand
it must be
alone.
combined.
Good. It comes
Because
combined, or
doesn't mean anything alone.
it goes combined with other, parts of, or other morphemes, free morphemes. In fact, we must refine our observations. In the surface structure, the negative particle not follows part of the auxiliary, but not all of it. Underline this. Okay? We must refine our observation. In surface structure, the negative particle not, or the sentence modifier, follows part of the auxiliary, but not all of it. In fact, it follows only the first auxiliary. Okay? So, what does it follow? It follows only the first auxiliary. Okay? In not Jerry could hear me, could is a case of past can. Can is the first occurring auxiliary. That's why we place not after it. This is typically okay. We use the observation auxiliary 1 for the first auxiliary that comes. Okay? So how do we represent this? By referring to it or by representing it with auxiliary 1 or aux1 for the first auxiliary that comes after tense. So whenever I ask you from now on about auxiliary 1, what would you say about this? aux1. What is aux1?
Auxiliary comes after the tense.
The first auxiliary that comes after the tense, or that follows the tense, or that precedes the others parts of the auxiliary. Because we know that, or we do realize from the very beginnings of the first three chapters, that we have different parts or different particles that belong to the same thing or the same verbal part, which is the auxiliary, right? They past can be ing go. We present have en eat. Those dress p1 present must have en be read. Okay? So long as the auxiliary contains something besides tense, a modal, have, or be. I think we have had this before in the auxiliary chapter. We talked about auxiliary in details. We said that the auxiliary is basically about tense, and it is the tense carrier. If we have no auxiliary in the sentence, so the tense is the auxiliary, right? But in addition to the tense, what do we have also? We have modal, have, and be. And I think we have had the extended version of the auxiliary, and we said that modal comes first or precedes the other auxiliaries. Then we have en, and the final one is the bing, right? The first element following thanks is auxiliary 1. Again, he repeats. So he repeats and insists or confirms the same idea. Our transformational rule for the correct placement of not should be read something like this. Move, this is the transformational rule between the double commas or the inverted commas. Move not to the position following the first auxiliary after tense. So when do we move not to the position following the first auxiliary after tense? When do we do this? In the surface or the deep? Which of these two? When do we move not to the position following the first auxiliary? When do we move not after the first auxiliary? In the case of surface structure or deep structure?
The service.
Of course, the surface. So easy. It's easy to see. Thanks a lot. What do we make out of
Sir,
these?
these are subjects.
So, not, we know the not. It is the particle or the sentence modifier according to transformational grammar. It is a sentence modifier, we know it. What about X? What does it represent here?
May I answer?
Yes, Amna.
It's a express subject.
Okay. Is it only the subject or the noun phrase?
Noun phrase in general.
Good. It's not only the subject. Sometimes it's a noun phrase, it's a noun, it's even a determiner and the noun, etc. So many things.
Nominal.
Yes. Tense, we know that this is the verb phrase. As far as the tense goes, we start with the verb phrase. Tense, auxiliary one, of course, aux one. Then we have why. What is why in this case?
May I, sir?
Complement.
Yes. Yes, someone said.
Yeah. Why it is represent to the complement in the sentence?
Good. So it is the complement of the sentence. And again, to which part of the sentence or to which phrase it belongs? The complement. So far we have studied both
Verb
parts.
phrase.
Yes? Yes,
The
Amir?
verb phrase.
Good, the verb phrase. The complement is either an objective one or a prepositional one or adverbial. In all cases, all in all, we should attach it in a way or another. It should be attached to the verb phrase, right? It should be attached to the verb phrase.
Sir,
That's the idea.
but not always, sir. Sometimes time, reason, all these adverbials.
And again, to which part it belongs?
Verb phrase.
Again, the verb phrase. But I think we
Doctor,
have
not,
two
not
different
always.
cases. We have differentiated between the two cases. I know what you mean or what you try to say. I know that. I do realize that. Sometimes it is part of the whole verb phrase. Other times it is part of which part is this? The other part? The main verb, right? نسيتوا طلاب؟
Right.
نسيتوا؟ ما هاي صارت عليها نقاش وجدال. خلي احكيها بالعربي. صار عليها نقاش طويل ووضحتها بوقتها. Sometimes we attach it to the main verb. Other times, no, it is not part of the main verb. It is part of the whole verb phrase. Okay? This is what you have referred to, Mortaba. And by the way, this is a good reference or a good indication. Nice. Nicely said. Phrase structure rules merely expand elements such as nucleus into MP and VP. Transformational rules rearrange. Pay attention to this. Phrase structure rules only expand. They do not delete, they do not add or rearrange. What is the job of the transformational rules? Pay attention, there is a difference, a big difference between transformational rules and phrase structure rules. In phrase structure rules, we only expand sentences or elements of sentences or structures. This is very important. In transformational rules, rearrange, delete, add, or substitute elements. So that's why we call them processes, transformational processes. واضح الفكرة؟ Why we call them, or why do we call them transformational processes? Because they either rearrange, delete, add, or substitute. That's why we call them processes. The symbol X, now he tries to clarify what is the symbol X and what is the other symbols, or what do they refer to. The symbol X stands for anything that comes, okay, or coming between not and the tense. This is so generalized, such as another sentence modifier, a noun phrase, etc. So it is not only a noun phrase or noun phrases, sometimes there are sentence modifiers or other modifiers. Since the rule operates in the same way regardless of what follows not, it works in the same way. We can simplify our rule by using the symbol X for any structure coming between not and tense, because it applies to all cases. Why? I think I asked you about X and Y. Y stands for anything following the aux, even the main verb. Okay? Even the main verb. And by the way, the main verb completes the action, so it is part of the complement in general. This may be other auxiliaries, a verb, and anything that follows a verb. Since the same process applies regardless of what follows auxiliary 1, we can prove the rule by using the symbol Y. That's why we used Y and X, or X and Y. For the deep structure not, they present can hear you. We can illustrate the rule in the following way. Not X tense auxiliary 1 Y, which which concludes or which is finalized as X tense auxiliary 1 not Y. Of course, to the left we have the deep structure, and to the right we have the surface structure. Note they present can hear you, they present cannot hear you. So this gives they cannot hear you after the phonological rules have been applied. Of course, the final element, as we said before in chapter 4, we said about 3 elements, or we talked about 3 elements. The final one is the phonological element. This process can be illustrated with the trees. It is the deep structure. But here we are required to draw 2 kinds of structures. انتبهوا يا جماعة. So far we have written, or we have drawn, only one structure, one tree diagram. But from now on I will require from you to write me down, or to to analyze sentences according to deep structure and surface structure. So, not they present can hear you. What is this? This is the deep structure. Not they, which is the NP, and present tense auxiliary, and the modal. Then we have the main verb, which is here, and you, which is the NP. Murtala, this is the answer to your question, or to your some kind of comment that you have raised so far.
Yes, sir.
This is the main verb. This is the main verb. If you check with me, I'm trying to comment on what has been mentioned earlier by Murtala. So this MP, as you see, is part of the main verb, and it is the complement at the same time, right? But when you talk about reason or purpose or other things besides, you can say that they are part of the verbal phrase or the verb phrase, right? So this is the negative deep
Right, sir.
structure. This is the negative deep structure. Now we move to the negative surface structure. They, present, can, not. So look at the places of not. In the deep structure, what is the place or the position of not? It was a sentence modifier,
Sentence
right?
modifier.
What about not right now in the surface structure? When do we place it, or where? Sorry.
It is one of the nodes under the axle auxiliary.
So it is part